Today we're talking about influencers. It's arguably one of the more important channels in the brand armory, and in certain sectors it's the leading one. The power of influencers is undoubtedly still on the rise thanks to the central role that social media and the creator economy now play in our daily lives. Today what we're going to be examining is what impact do they have on brands and people, how do influencers and social platforms affect content consumption, brand affinity and purchase behaviour, and will that change as our economy tightens? We've got a fantastic panel of leading authorities on this subject, so I'd like to welcome, if I may, Andrew Bloch, who is arguably an influencer in his own right and founder of Andrew Bloch and Associates, a boutique consultancy specialising in the communications and marketing industry. Andrew co-founded Frank way back in 2000, one of the UK's most respected PR agencies. He's also acted as official spokesperson and PR advisor to Lord Sugar, which is why he's at the BBC today, and he has over 20 years of working with him and handling influencer deals for the likes of Steven Bartlett, Karren Brady, Anthony Joshua, Pierre White, Will.i.am, and many, many more in the last year alone. He also manages the PR for all the Apprentice winners and their companies since the show started back in 2005. And he heads up the influencer practice for new business consultancy, the AAR, and is a board advisor to talent marketing agency Talent Village. So he's a busy chap. Polly Atherton is the managing director of Stir Public Relations. She's been in PR for almost 20 years, having worked her way up through agencies that included Freud's and Frank. She spent 4.5 years as the MD of Frank Australia before returning to the UK and joining Stir in 2018. She's worked across the board of consumer PR with a diverse portfolio of entertainment, travel, FMCG and consumer tech brands. As she says, from sex toys to tech consultancies, she's done it all. And then finally, we have Alex Payne, who's the founder of Room Unlocked. Alex is an experienced television presenter and broadcaster, having spent 20 years with Sky Sports. He now hosts the world's largest rugby podcast, The Good, The Bad and The Rugby, alongside James Haskell and Mike Tyndall. In 2017, and based on true insight, he founded Room Unlocked, where brands, charities and people of influence connect with each other over mutually beneficial partnerships. Room Unlocked is a contra economy, and I'll get him to explain what that means, where success is based on collaborations, not commercials. So there you have it. Great panel. Fantastic to have you here. Thank you very much for sparing your time today. I like, if I can, we're going to bounce across each other. And as I say, it's a conversation. But Andrew, if I can start with you, is the power of influencers overblown? Just unmute Andrew. I think you're on mute, sir.
3 years of Zoom calls and we're still working out whether...
Still struggling.
Still struggling.
On my mobile phone, so that is my excuse. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. In answer to your question, I don't think the power of influencers is overstated. It's going nowhere. It's on the rise, and like you alluded to sort of in your opening gambit, you know, what's happened is with the advent of digital media, it's just become more and more important. And now that the industry is starting to mature, or has matured to a degree, we can measure it effectively as well. And that's what's made a huge, huge difference to the rise in influencer marketing via brands.
Thank you. Polly, I mean, how big is the industry? Can you give us some idea of how it's structured and how large it is today?
Gosh, it's a hard one to quantify because it's just interwoven into all of the content that we consume. But a recent article billed it as being worth 16 billion globally in 2022, which is just huge. But that actually represents a 19% uplift from 2021. So it definitely doesn't show any signs of slowing down. When you think about it in terms of an economy, so the content creator economy, people who are monetizing their content on social, it actually employs 50 million people worldwide, which is quite eye-watering. But if you start to sort of break that down, if you think behind any viral post, there's going to be a whole team. There's going to be videographers, editors, art directors, through to the agents that are brokering the deal. So you can see sort of how that number is reached, and it certainly is sort of one of the fastest growing sectors. I think when you also think about sort of the structure of the influencers, you've got your nanos from your 1,000 to your 10,000, onto your micros, sort of going up to that 100,000 follower mark, and then macros up to sort of 1 million. And then the Super League, when you've got the sort of the Kylie Jenners of this world who just, you know, staggering numbers of 233 million followers, which is quite incredible, and are now commanding up to like 1 million per post.
I was going to say, of that 16.9 billion, how much of that is her?
Yes.
Alex, you obviously caught onto a good thing in terms of actually your business and what you do, because obviously it's very much kind of mirroring the growth of this whole sector. Can you tell us a little bit about what it does and how it works?
Yes, so to echo Andrew's thoughts, thank you very much, Steve, for having us. And you kindly introduced us as a leading authority. I feel anything but. There's some very wise folk on this call, and I very much feel that we've come at it from a very different angle and often describe ourselves as a fish swimming in the opposite direction. Influencer marketing space is a fascinating one. It's obviously evolved very quickly, but I think most people would kind of identify it as influencers are people who are paid to create content, essentially, and brands have a very interesting way of sort of working with them on that, but often it's about promoting a brand. And that, I think, is when most of the size of the industry that Polly's talking about has been built. We have built something, I think, that's a little bit different, and it's come about from an actual learning. And you referenced kind of the fact that I've done 20 years of mucking about on television. I've got absolutely no interest in being a celebrity or an influencer, but because I've done 20 years of weekly telly, I've had a lot of brands who have thrown things my way or asked me to talk about them with a check attached to it. And the reason that this platform has been built, actually, we get described quite often as a cross between Tinder and LinkedIn. And that is because a lot of what I've seen is fairly ineffectual. And the whole premise for the business was built on one single box of Star Wars merchandise that I was sent by a promotional company who were sort of giving out this limited edition merch, books, games, DVDs, TV controllers. And in return for it, what they wanted was promotion for their back-to-back movie screenings of Star Wars at the weekend. Classic promo box, social media awareness was their requirement, and they had used an agency who crunched data, sweated their networks, done a whole load of sort of outreach, thrown out 100 of these boxes in hope of social media awareness, one of which came to yours truly, who has absolutely no interest in Star Wars whatsoever. I haven't seen it since I was 8, got no real interest in watching the films, don't really want the box. And what I couldn't really get my head around is why is the most successful movie franchise in history coming up with a great idea, spending lots of money behind it, and then throwing it at prats like me who give them nothing back in return. And so we have built a platform whereby instead of the brands doing all the outreach, you come to Room Unlocked and you create a campaign, which is, hello, we're Star Wars, we're offering boxes of cool limited edition Star Wars merch, and we want to find genuine fans who want the box, are happy to do the promotion we're looking for, and genuinely might well sit down to watch the movies. And so that is where this Tinder LinkedIn analogy comes from. As a brand, what you get through us are people saying, I love it, I need it, I'm interested in it, I want it, and I'll talk about it purely because it's something that fits with who I am. And that saves a brand a huge amount of outreach, it saves them a huge amount of money, etc. And they are unlocking, excuse me, genuine advocates who talk about the things that they genuinely love. And the reason it's interesting for influencers, I think, in this day and age, and there's a whole load of research actually that we've done, which indicates that, of course, the right people should be paid to promote the right brand. That is absolutely not in question. But audiences are very, very savvy now. They see jarring collaborations a mile off. They lose respect for the influencers and they lose respect for the brands at the same time. So we have created what we think is quite an interesting ecosystem whereby influencers are able to still talk about the things they love. And that is what generates an audience. It's what generates your engagement. It's what sets you apart and makes you look authentic. So we're not competing in that kind of paid influencer space, but we are offering them a service where they can connect with the brands and the opportunities they genuinely love. And when you do the two together, we think that helps you retain your influence. And actually, we're bringing in this, and you mentioned already, this big play in charities as well. We talk a lot about the most influential people having a blend of commercial, contra, and cause-related content on their platforms. And we're really interested in those latter two sectors, whereby you do the things you love and you do the things you believe in. And if you get that right, then the commercial activity should follow off the back of it. So genuinely fascinated with all the minds on here to if anyone's got views and thoughts, would love to hear them. But
I'm sure that there's loads of thoughts, Alex. I mean, obviously you pick up there on the point about actually data and actually the fact that obviously with a platform like yours and many others out there, what we do see now is the ability to be able to actually both report and target. Andrew, if I can come to you, I mean, one of the great things about the influencer market is that you can actually have a very clear measured ROI. What sort of metrics do you think the marketers really need to be thinking about when they actually engage in this particular channel?
Well, ultimately, it's got to be linked to the business objectives of the brand, the product, the service that's being promoted. So whether that is a sales-driven objective, whether it's generating a change in perception, whether it's creating engagement, all of those kind of measures, as you would with any other sort of form of marketing, can be measured. Obviously, the analytics of a platform allow you to look at these things in great detail. Some of the decisions that need to be made are, are you aiming for reach or are you aiming for engagement? And Polly talked about earlier the various different sort of categories of influencers and content creators. Often the biggest stars on the planet, the Kardashians of this world, they might have the numbers, they don't necessarily have the engagement and the following. So the first thing to be looking at, like Alex said, is it relevant to the people that you're working with? If something doesn't feel authentic, it doesn't matter how many people you're reaching, it's not going to have an impact, it's not going to generate cut-throughs. So there's lots of analytics that can be used to look at the suitability of a particular talent, looking at how their audience breaks down in terms of geography, in terms of age, in terms of interest. So that targeting piece has become a lot more straightforward, really. And then it's looking at what you want to achieve off the back of it. And there's obviously lots of different collaborations and deals you can do, ranging from the kind of Star Wars style free gifting through to ongoing partnerships. And it's no different really to working with any talent on or offline. You want them to feel authentic, relevant to the brand, and to drive the business in the direction that you're looking to achieve.
Okay, so we've got a channel there. You can control the targeting. You can obviously work with influencers to get your commercial message across in an authentic way, and you can measure the results. So in many respects, it has the kind of the same, I guess, the same truth and same vehicle as broadcast, albeit it's a narrowcast medium to an extent. Polly, if we think a little bit about, obviously, marketing spend is really under pressure at the moment, and obviously lots of brands are having to cut back on their marketing. Yet we're seeing this growth in influencer. What do you think is driving that? Is it value for money, or do you think it's more to do with the fact that actually it's really effective? What's your feelings?
It's about effectiveness. I think, uncertainty seems to be the word of sort of 2023. And I think in those times, lots of marketeers, the temptation is to sort of rein it in or sort of tighten your belt. But I think actually that is sort of counterintuitive and the opposite to what you should be doing, because if you are stemming your sort of influencer outreach or influencer marketing, you're effectively sort of cutting off that direct to consumer channel. And certainly in a sort of period of financial crisis, you need to be dialing up your brand awareness. You need to be sort of building that trust with your consumers and keeping that dialogue very much alive and kicking. But I think it comes back to sort of what Andrew was saying, is just doing it, applying that level of scrutiny to how you operate and who you're partnering with, just to make sure that it's meeting those objectives, but similarly delivers the ROI that you're looking for. I think there was a sort of a great example recently where the pushchair brand Eye Candy partnered up with Love Islander Molly-Mae, who's just had a baby, and they gave her early access to a new model for them, a new colorway, and just one image of Molly-Mae out on the street with pushchair. That brand just saw an influx. Their waiting list and pre-orders just sort of went through the roof in moments after that post appeared. So obviously that's sort of a pricier purchase, but I think the same applies. If you can do that authentic selection, make sure you're aligning yourself with people that really resonate with your audience and are relevant to your audience, you need to sort of keep that channel on. Okay,
and building on that, I mean, obviously a lot of these influencers are making an awful lot of money. And really this question is if all three of you really, what are the kind of normal ways that people basically get compensated for this work in this space? And I spoke about contra, we'll come back to that in a second, but in the vast majority of deals, how do they work? Anyway,
I'm going to step away from that because I've got sort of challenges around it. I'll give that to Polly or Andrew.
I just said there's so many different ways to play. I mean, there is, you know, from the sort of the contra and quite, you know, sort of the gifting route through to more sophisticated arrangements that, you know, potentially have a longer lifespan, and you can sort of work with those influencers and content creators in a more sort of meaningful you know, way all through the funnel, from, you know, performance marketing, or just purely at an awareness level at the top.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, where a lot of brands are working very effectively is to bring in content creators as partners and offer them a share of revenue for the success that they can bring on their channels. So a lot of the deals that are being structured, you know, aren't necessarily, we need you to post X times a week and to say this. It's giving the creators the freedom to post in a way that they feel is going to resonate with their audience, giving them the freedom to post when they want, as frequently as they want, but then giving them an upside on any sales that they achieve. So there's some quite sophisticated deals that are being put into place, and those are the ones that work best. You know, if you can, you know, if Molly-Mae was taking a percentage of every pram that she sold, I'm sure she would do a much better job than if she was just paid 50 grand to move it around on the street and pose for the paps. So there's different ways of structuring it. Agencies as well are structuring deals in more sophisticated ways. So, you know, they're looking at the overall media spend of a brand, what their traditional cost per acquisition would be, what their cost per click would be if they're doing performance marketing, and they're putting bonuses in place for uplifts that influencer agencies and media agencies can achieve. So the lower that they can get their cost per acquisition, the more benefit they get commercially off the back of those deals. So it is evolving, and it's down to the measurability and the accountability of what these influencers can achieve. And I think, you know, brands realize that in order to create the right content, you have to give a degree of freedom to these creators. You know, they know what their audience likes, they know what they respond to, they know their interests. So when brands sort of are too rigid in terms of how they brief them, that in terms of messaging, in terms of style, often it doesn't work. You know, it's no difficulty whatsoever to reach millions and millions of people. The challenge is to get people to stop scrolling, to sit up, to take notice, to engage. And that's where these partnerships work best, when you give an element of freedom to the people that you're asking to help promote your brand.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, it's, we always talk about curation, not dictation. I think to get the full benefit of the channel and the people that you're aligning yourself with, that sort of flexibility is key.
And I was going to quickly add two pieces there, because I wholeheartedly agree that what we have seen is that the definition of influencer 5 years ago was essentially someone who was paid to put a brand onto their Instagram post or into their Instagram grid. What influence now is about brands tapping into the stories and the channels that influencers can take them. It's a far more authentic way of working. It seems to be far more palatable to audiences. We try very hard, actually, to actually get our brands to genuinely think about what influence is. And a lot of people limit it to social media. But through our platform, we've had products on television, we've had people talking about experiences on the radio, we've put people in clothes on red carpets, etc. And actually influence is a far broader spectrum than just sticking things on Instagram and TikTok. And it was interesting, Polly, you were talking about Molly-Mae and her buggy. I don't know whether that was just a picture in the paper, but one of the most influential people in this country has to be the Princess of Wales, and she wears an item of clothing and online shops go into meltdown. So her influence is extraordinary, but none of it ever sits across social media. And I think brands need to be really aware of how they can tap into a much broader sort of platform of influence beyond just getting clicks, likes, and scroll backs, or whatever it is.
So with that in mind, in terms of the role of the agency versus the talent, you're saying that very much the talent is responsible for basic curation and should be given carte blanche to create content as they see fit. I'm assuming there is obviously a brief and there's an arrangement between the agency brand and the influencer to the extent that they give them some sort of definition as to what they're trying to achieve. But then beyond that, actually, there is an opportunity, obviously, to actually plan in terms of, as you would do with a media campaign, where that content can be cut and diced and where you want to push it through normal PR channels. And I guess that's where, successful PR agencies come in and how they extend the reach of the work that's being done by the influencers. How does that work in practice, Polly? Do you sit down with the influencer and you talk about actually where you're going to take the content, or talk me through that?
I mean, again, it will vary from campaign to campaign, but where possible, it's about making it a collaborative experience. So you're right, there will be a brief, there will be sort of a broader set of objectives, but then it's that sort of consultation and collaboration to work out, based on their knowledge of their audiences. I wouldn't profess they're best suited to be able to give that guidance and sort of recommendation about how to fully flex that channel in an authentic way that is going to be well received by their followers. So it's having that sort of early dialogue and exchange of ideas to sort of build out a plan that is going to be, sit well within the platform and equally sort of meet the brand requirements.
And we also see, I guess, this rise of kind of the anti-influencer in a sense that TikTokers are now beginning to take up a position of being de-influencing. Is this a trend that's likely to take some time to develop, or is it something that's really trying to topple influencer culture?
I think that's a really interesting one, and it is a bit messy because it feels like the call from within the house, or arguably the content creators biting the hand that feeds them, but actually rather I think it's very sort of perceptive of those content creators because they're reading the room. Consumers are getting more savvy. I think Alex referenced it earlier. They are sort of getting a bit disillusioned with the being bombarded with lots of sponsored content. So in sort of the de-influencing mode, content creators are recognizing that. And I think with time, hopefully that will bear out more authentic content, because I think there's this recognition that quality versus quantity. And so when they're considering what brands they align with, being far more selective. So the end result means that, you're going to have better, more authentic content being sort of served by content creators, because they just don't want to put off their fans and followers.
No, and their fans at the end of the day are their living. So actually, it's absolutely essential, I guess, that they maintain that relationship and treat them with respect. Tell me, reality TV has been a huge impact on the whole influencer market. If you kind of go back and think about the mega influencers today, a lot of them started as reality TV stars. Andrew, this is one for you, because one of your roles is cultivating and developing the profile of winners, and this week obviously the Apprentice is coming to its natural conclusion, and the new Apprentice will be revealed, I guess, later this week. Taking her, because I know it is a her, because there's only ladies left. How do you start? How do you go about basically managing their profile and starting to actually get them on the influencer circuit?
I think what's happening is TV is a great platform for awareness and always will be. What social media does with the best talent is it gives people a glimpse into their lives, and that is, as consumers, what we want. We don't want to be sold to 24/7. You take someone like a Lord Sugar who's got 5.3 million Twitter followers. There is a recipe for his social media. Putting it simply, 75-80% of it is ads, and those ads work. Every annoying tweet to sell one of his products, to promote one of his companies, directs sales. We see it, we monitor it. But you can't just do that. You have to add a bit of entertainment. In his case, it's normally having some banter with Piers Morgan, commenting on what's going on with football or politics or EastEnders or whatever it is he's interested in. That sort of 20% is enough to hook in an audience, and that's what allows him to sell off that channel. It's also a right to reply, and whilst it causes lots of work for me, it also helps me a lot, because it's a chance to counter unfair criticism or comments from the media. It's a chance to kill off stories. In the case of the Apprentice winner, I'll do my absolute utmost not to reveal who it is, otherwise there'll be a lot of annoyed people, but it is a she. the journey really is about transforming them from what is essentially being a reality TV personality into a credible business person. So where I'll be working with them is to get across the story of what it's like to get investment from Lord Sugar, what it's like to win the show, and then following their journey as they work together to build this business and take it to market. For me, you know, tomorrow night is the final. It will have viewing figures of somewhere around about 10 million people. That is a massive opportunity. That the moment in time around that winning moment will double, triple, quadruple their social media following. So we have a plan in place around the final and those sort of hours leading into it and coming out of it that will maximize that social media following, because I know that the bigger I can get that following, the easier life is for the next year or two. Because if you've got your own audience, if you've got your own channels, and the same is true for any brand, you've got a route to market. So what I'm looking to do in the very first instance is grow those channels as much as I can in this window, because it doesn't last long. And what you see with shows like The Apprentice, with Love Island, there's huge hype, there's huge momentum for a sort of 8-week, 12-week period, however long the show's on for. It quickly dies off, and The Apprentice will finish tomorrow night. We'll move on to the next show, and the candidates who have been in the spotlight and had lots of attention will suddenly become quite disappointed that that momentum just falls off a cliff. My job with the winner is to maintain that, and in order to do that, I need to tell the story, show behind the scenes, give people a reason to keep following, and then I'll be able to use that as a platform to promote their business and also to generate commercial deals outside of their business.
I might well plug, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I might well plug, I do a lot with Mike Tyndall, Andrew, I might well plug him into you. It's very interesting. The reason I pick up on, he did I'm a Celebrity last year, and his following grew enormously. But having won the Rugby World Cup in 2003 with England and been a hugely successful captain of his country, and obviously he's married into the family he's married into, his following has never grown as rapidly as it did on the 3 days that he wore his wife's fascinators at Ascot. So he is now probably one of the most influential millinery influencers in the entire country. And I mean, we laugh about it purely because this influence in inverted commas is such a sort of transient, you never quite know where you're going to be taken, how you're going to end up growing your audience, etc. I think it's very interesting what you're saying about trying to control that narrative, but often for reasons totally unbeknown and totally unplanned, you can end up taking your influence into channels you never thought you'd end up in. So I don't know, I'm not cynical overall, and I completely understand what you're saying, but I just find this space fascinating and how fast it moves, where you can end up going, how quickly you can lose your influence in this day and age. You get one thing wrong and you're toast. And it's a very high wire act, I think, to be a high profile person of influence in this current climate.
To that point, Andrew, obviously, Lord Sugar, I'm sure, has his own views on everything. But are you able to discuss with him the next tweet, or do you actually have to then pick up when he's done it and actually said, actually, now what damage limitation is what we got to do now? How does that work?
A bit of both, really. I mean, someone like him has his own mind, as do most people. I think, you know, where I'll try and guide him is areas not to get involved in and what not to comment on and when to sort of keep your head down. The thing with social media, you know, even if you're not an influencer and you're just using it personally, you know, there's this sort of dopamine hit of that rush of attention you get when you post something and the likes and the comments. It's trying to remind people, just because a platform is there, you don't always have to use it.
Yeah.
If you think about yourself and what you share on social media, yeah, there are people that literally share what they have for breakfast every second of their waking day. There's others that, you know, just think, oh, I better post once a week. Just because that channel's there, don't always feel the need to use it. Use it relatively sparingly. When you're in this sort of content creator area, frequency is important. You know, by posting more, you do generate more followers. It's quite simple, but it's kept the PR industry busy because there's often damage limitation, and you just have to, especially with someone like Lord Sugar, fair play to the guy. He's going to be 76 on Friday. He didn't grow up with social media. Quite simply, he sometimes forgets that he's talking to 5 million people, and that some of those people are, or a lot of those people are members of the media, and they're just waiting for him to slip up. And, I look at some of his tweets and it reminds me of like my family WhatsApp group, but, and I'm sure he's forgetting sometimes. So, I mean, I know personally when I'm posting stuff, I try not to be controversial or to say anything too negative. And if ever I'm in doubt, I will always pause before I just press send and just think, does this have the potential to be misinterpreted? Do I need to say this? Is it going to offend anyone? And if I'm in any doubt whatsoever, I just press delete. And you have to train people to get into that mindset, because it is so easy. And what you post, takes a second to post it, but the damage can be completely career limiting if you get it wrong. So
this is what you call the Gary Lineker effect, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the case of someone like Gary Lineker, he knows what he's doing. He's strong-minded. He's got his opinions and his views. Whether they're right or wrong is not for me or anyone else to comment on. But he's no idiot. He knows what he's doing, and he also knows the limitations. And obviously, what's happened, in the situation with him, it's put the BBC in a difficult position because they have guidelines and codes of conduct, and let's not get into that now because it's a whole other debate.
Particularly as you're sitting in the BBC. But I mean, I think what's quite interesting there is obviously his value post that particular comment is probably twice what it was before. And actually, whilst it's probably hit maybe some of his commercial deals, it's actually heightened awareness, and it's actually driven. He arguably had as much awareness he already needed, but I suspect actually, to your point about 15 minutes of fame and extending your influence over time, it can't but help.
Yeah, what you've got to remember with someone like him is the BBC are reliant on him as much as he is on them. His, their biggest star. They can't afford to lose him. Not every talent is in the same position. So, often media slip-ups are a good excuse for a broadcaster or a brand to get out of a contract. So in his case, he was in a strong position. If they were, potentially thinking about ending his contract or weren't very happy with how things were going, if the viewerships were down, you might have found a very different outcome to that situation. He was in a strong position. I'm not saying he knew that when he tweeted. I'm sure he didn't think the whole thing through and where it could go, but certainly that helped him. And I don't think it will limit his brand endorsements at all. If anything, he's shown himself to be extremely powerful, to stand by his beliefs. He handled the whole situation, in my incredibly well. So it's worked to his benefit, but that story doesn't always play out in the same way.
It comes back to the point you made too about actually knowing when to say nothing too, because he did his initial remark and then just went quiet. Quite a lot of questions coming in about what I call the value exchange between actually the talent and what they get remunerated and how they get remunerated. So there's questions relating to how can local authorities, for example, in the public sector, how can they compensate influencers? Is it legitimate to pay influencers if you're in that sector? I guess that would also be the same, Alex, for charities. Questions related to actually businesses now basically giving affiliate revenue share as part of the way to remunerate talent. Ideas that talent are taking a cut of the possible sales that they generate as a result. The reality is, however you get remunerated, this is a value exchange between fame and coverage and influence, and obviously what you're getting compensated for. So it's no different, I guess, in some respects, for paying for TV airtime, albeit that you're directing it to an individual rather than to a broadcaster like ITV. Polly, in the conversations you have with clients about this value exchange, how do you actually get down to how do they actually value the influencer? How do they you get to the point and say, look, this particular influencer needs X, and then the client has a conversation with you, it's a negotiation, or what happens?
Yeah, it's a negotiation. I mean, there are so many different factors that you would be weighing up again, like what is the role for this relationship, and what is it serving towards the business objectives that will come into sort of how we determine where the value can be claimed. And it will be very much a sliding scale, just looking at the bigger picture. As it relates to that. So there isn't sadly sort of a sort of menu that you can draw from. And so each case is going to be very unique, and you've just got to weigh up all the factors, and then sort of, I guess, working with our clients is us and using our relationships to go out and then broker the best deal based on sort of our knowledge of what we're looking to get out of it.
Okay, and do agencies get remunerated on that basis? Is it kind of normally, like in the old days, there'd be a commission, or how does it work?
Yeah, so I mean, that will form part of our scope of work with the client. So that brokering of that will be folded into sort of our fees and remuneration. We don't tend to do, at Stir at least, we don't tend to do like a cut, but it will be certainly factored into our fees and development of that.
Thank you. Alex, I think we've probably laboured the point already about tone of voice and brand alignment. I'm just going to cover that point. But I think what's quite interesting for me, there's a development in terms of getting more control and brands wanting to be able to actually make sure that influencers stay on message. We're seeing very much the kind of the rise of the virtual influencer, AI-driven CGI creations, Android types. Is that something that you've witnessed in on your platform, or are you aware of it?
I'm certainly aware of it. It's not something that we've seen a huge amount of at the moment. I was actually going to just pick up on Polly's point around the last question, was Jeremy's question around, just very quickly, the incentivization of talent. And it probably leads on to that, I think, which is that influencer now it's not a dirty word, but influencers are more and more reluctant to describe themselves as that. We're hearing more of them talk about themselves as creators. And the point that comes on to Jeremy's question is actually a lot of them are now describing themselves as founders. And I think that relationship between brand and influencer is getting ever closer. And we're seeing more and more influencers actually taking stakes in business. You think of George Clooney and Casamigos, and then you think of, I can't remember which Paul it is, but this Prime drink, they are now really incentivized in that brand. And when I think Jeremy says, does that undermine authenticity? I think what you do get when you have got a sort of an equity stake in a business, you get far more from the influencer in terms of advocacy and promotion. If you say to someone, I'll pay you £1,000 for a post, you get a post. If you say, I'll give you equity, go have fun with it and grow the business, they tend to do a lot more. And I always remember the story around P. Diddy and Ciroc Vodka, and I can't remember the numbers specifically, but I think he was offered £1 million to be the face of the brand, and he turned around and said, no, actually, I'll take 10% of the business. And every single party he went to, he carried a bottle of Ciroc, and it ended up being a £100 million exit for him. So I think that's a very interesting way of brands and influencers collaborating. In terms of your questions around AI, we are hearing and we are seeing, and it's definitely coming. It's not something that we do a huge amount of through Brim Unlocked. It makes me feel very old, that kind of thing. I feel very detached from that as a kind of an entity. I don't know if others would agree or disagree, but I can see the appeal for it. I mean, it's interesting when we talk about the power of television. We're doing more and more sort of Gen Z, etc. And again, I've got far more intelligent people in the company who are making far greater inroads in that than I am. But I watch my 10-year-old son, who doesn't sit down to watch television. Everything's online, and the people who influence him are YouTubers, TikTokers, whatever it is. So there is that kind of disconnect. I'm sure he will grow into the television side of the media. But yeah, I think the AI thing is coming. In all honesty, I can't really give you a terribly intelligent answer. Watch this space.
I think it's obviously unfolding in sort of real time, so I think it's going to be a fascinating space to watch. But I think fundamentally there's still that sort of intrinsic human desire for connection that you can't get from AI. Even when I think about the influencers I follow, it's sort of you appreciate the chinks in the armor and the flaws. And I think, AI being curated and, being able to highly control the tone and things like that, I think it sort of is not going to give consumers that real element or that backstory that they are craving from the sort of content creators that they are following.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big trends that is emerging quite fast is the rise of the sort of virtual influencer. and using deep fake technology and AI, brands are creating their own brand ambassadors who aren't real people. They're avatars, characters, whatever you want to call them, which is, it's a way of regaining control. There's obviously pros and cons of doing that, but it's particularly emerging in the internal comms space. So Unilever are doing a lot in this space for all of their internal communications, and they have a virtual AI, I don't even know what you call it, to be honest, not a real person, who is the face of their internal comms and doing conferences and stuff like that. And the technology is unbelievable, and it's super exciting as a space, because obviously you can control what you're doing and you're not reliant on a third party. But it's not for everything. You know, you don't get with that the power of celebrity and the pull that brings in, but it's definitely a way of creating content in a different and interesting way.
You're on mute,
You're on
Stephen.
mute.
Can you see that there? There's a CGI image of a CGI influencer. You know,
Yeah.
I would struggle to know whether that is real or not.
Not real, Stephen.
It's not real. This is why I've been getting it wrong all these years.
That
That was back in 2018. But if you know, so in terms of advancement of CGI and where we've got to, it won't be long before you will know whether they are real or not. And
I was in Saudi Arabia last month at a tech conference, and I was watching a presenter, and it took me, this maybe says more about me than anything else, but 10 minutes to realize it was a robot, wasn't it? And it honestly was so realistic. It was the freakiest thing ever. And this technology is only going to get better and better. But yeah, it's blurring. And if you look at some of the deep fake technology that's out there, I mean, it's unbelievably realistic. There was an influencer that was exposed quite recently, a Japanese kind of biker chick, so to speak, that had millions of followers, and then revealed themselves to be some sort of 60-year-old Japanese guy with long hair that was just using deep fake and CGI technology. So yeah, not everything is as it seems on the internet.
Great, so there's hope for me yet. I mean, that's the other thing, is that what we are seeing too is that influencers are aging up, and actually some of the niches that actually are now being developed are certainly targeted at 50+ audiences. There's influencers everywhere in every category, in each sector, and I think if we just focus on the ones that we know most about, which is obviously in the areas of fashion and celebrity, we kind of forget actually there's a huge opportunity on different platforms. And actually, just talk about platforms for a second, because that's all changing, isn't it? You know, we've got Twitter, obviously I call it under siege, but it's going through, I guess, a change. We've got Facebook that's actually losing audience. We've got Insta that still seems to be doing pretty well, and TikTok's going crazy. The channels, and we spoke about channels earlier on, it doesn't have to be social. And actually Nick Band just put a note on there. What's the difference between today's influencers and what we PR folk have been doing for decades on radio promotions, press trips, reviews, etc.? I'd advocate nothing. I just think that there are new channels, and the fact that content's now being created by individuals rather than corporations. But it's much the same. Where am I going with this question? So the point I suppose I'm trying to make is that influencers can target any audience now. So actually, you're as likely, I guess, to get inquiries from brands that are targeting 65-year-old women about hair products as you will do of 22-year-olds basically talking about makeup. Is that happening now? Is that happening for you in your agency lives?
Answer, yes, is the short answer. I mean, you can target anyone, and there's often a perception that, you know, TikTok is for kids and all of this kind of stuff. It's not. I mean, you can read, the beauty of content marketing is it's so targeted, and there is a niche for everything. And, you know, Stephen, I know you like your classic cars and your fine wine and your cigars and all of these kind of things. You know, there are influencers in that area that, you know, will reach you, and you will go to different platforms to discover them. And actually, you know, one of the biggest factors at the moment is how people search. And, you know, YouTube and TikTok and Instagram are significant as search engines. It's how people discover products and brands. So, which is another reason why this whole area is becoming more and more influential. But don't fall into thinking that social media is just for kids. It's not.
And circling back around to your sort of question earlier, Stephen, just like with the sort of the cost of living and sort of the financial uncertainty, it's a great mode of, you know, limiting that wastage, because you can be super targeted, which is really exciting.
I would very quickly add, I mean, like you mentioned Twitter, etc. I mean, none of these platforms are going anywhere. I think Twitter's actually grown its sort of global activity 2% since Elon took over. I know it's got its challenges, but it seems to have had a bit of a bounce with the Elon factor. Facebook it's got its challenges likewise, but it's absolutely not going anywhere. We've actually seen, we're 4.5, 5 years old now. We have seen our influencers moving across the platforms in that time. So there's a lot of Facebook offering, a lot of Twitter offering at the start, very much Instagram over the last few years. TikTok has exploded in the last 12 months. There's been a bit of Be Real. I know Snapchat's trying very hard to make a comeback. So you're absolutely right, Andrew. I think brands have got to be quite fluid in where they go to find their audiences. I was going to say, I'm not sure many people buy cars and wine off the internet. And then I remember when we spoke last week, Andrew, you said you had just bought a car off the internet. So not always. But what I think is very interesting about certainly the power of the influencer is how it is changing behavior dramatically. And we've got, you know, girls who work in the office and they will buy off Instagram. They never go into a shop. They click, they buy, it comes to their house. If they don't like it, they send it back type thing. And, you know, if you can get it right, it is extraordinarily powerful.
So I think the other thing that I've observed as a consumer is, you know, I actually quite enjoy seeing ads on social media because generally they're well targeted and they're things that I'm interested in. And, you know, my purchasing consumption, I mean, the amount of stuff that I buy just on impulse because I see it on Instagram is scary. But yeah, I just bought a car and that was really based on having, I mean, I didn't directly buy the car by clicking on an ad, but I follow a guy who runs a car showroom who is brilliant on Instagram and TikTok, and I've been following him for about 6 months, a year, and that led me to making a decision of what car to get and where to get it from. So that's the power of influencers, and this is a guy, I mean, it links back to what I was saying about real niche specialisms. You know, he owns a car showroom. He's not in traditional senses an influencer, but he is influential because he understands this market and he educates and he provides good content. And that's, you know, you don't get many bigger purchases than buying a new car. So it works, and marketers realise this.
As do you know, estate agents. You know, we look at actually how certain estate agents, so in Countrywide, for example, and others, how they've actually used Insta to be able to actually build that relationship, to be able to educate the market and to be able to engage. It seems to be working very well for them. Okay, I just see we've got any more questions for anyone. I'm happy to open it up to all of you. If you want to raise your hand or come off mute, if you've got a question you want to ask the panel, please do so. We've got a few pop in here. Sarah Evans, please can you talk a little bit more about nano and micro, aka more affordable, the side of influencer marketing? Where do we find them? How best to create content with them? And when we can't afford a Kardashian style celeb. Who would like to take that one?
So I can say from Stir at the agency perspective, we have various tools and data tools that we're able to sort of tap into and, you know, do searches that way and sort of prescribe various different you know, regions, you know, follower base, etc., and search by that. But I think there's also something to be said for that human lens that you need to apply as well. So just, you know, having my team, making sure that they are sort of well versed and sort of following, you know, interesting people, and even, you know, recommendations that we get back through the data tool. It's then doing that human level of filtering and really sort of getting to grips with those content creators and just the sort of the content that they're organically putting out, the style, the tone, just making sure it's got the correct fit, you know, in that selection process. And then I would say, those nano and micro influencers, some of the most creative bunch that, we work with, and they know their audiences inside out. So they will have a very good understanding of how best to operate within their channels, and will often be full of their own ideas. So it might be that we come with a sort of a loose brief, and then that will evolve through the discussions, and actually, they might have a way in or a creative idea that we hadn't considered. So I just think it's just that conversation and sort of working through it collaboratively.
I think behind that question inevitably is that kind of, if it's a channel I've not used before and I want to use that channel, is there kind of minimum commitment I need to be thinking about? What's the cost of getting involved?
Difficult one to answer, because again, it would come back to sort of the objectives of what you're hoping to achieve. And I think that we're seeing that, costs are creeping up as even the sort of the nano and the micros are becoming more aware of their value. So, even in recent years since COVID, we've seen that number sort of going up from, you could, potentially be engaging a nano influencer on a contra, or, like a few £100, but, that I've seen rise to, £500, £600 for a post, or etc. So it's evolving fast. But again, it's about going back to the objectives and what you're hoping to deliver off the back of the work, and then looking at your budget at large and what then feels like the appropriate volume to put to it.
And I think this is where brands and agencies can be smart. You can tie them into affiliate deals, whereby, your success is their success and vice versa. And when it gets to the sort of Kardashian level of influencer, personally, I couldn't hand on heart recommend to any client spending a six-figure sum on a post, which is what they command. I mean, I'm not saying you have to be an idiot to do that, but it's not what I would advise. So there's some pretty big deals that can be done with big talent if you're prepared to give them a share of revenue, if you're prepared to give them equity in the company. And you can see where this world is moving. If you look at the likes of the Sidemen and Jake Paul and people like that, and what they've done with Prime, or what they've done in terms of releasing Sides, which is their restaurant chain, or if you look at people like Ryan Reynolds and the impact that he's had on brands that he's taken equity stakes in or actually launched himself, this is where it's going. This is where the big content creators can make huge amounts of money. And when you're dealing with big talent, even if it's big sums of money, to be honest, 50 grand here, 100 grand there, it's not that significant to them. If you start to talk to them about a percentage of equity or a percentage for every sale they make, it brings them in as partners rather than suppliers. And that's where some of the best deals are happening. And they're not always completely visible to the public. You don't always understand what you're doing, but I've done talent deals where they've taken a proportion of ticket sales, they've taken equity in the company, they've taken a seat on an advisory board. And that's where these deals work best. It's like, you made the point earlier, Stephen, or Nick made the point about, is this any different to, PR that's been going on for years? The answer is no. It's the same as any celebrity endorsement. It's make it work, make it authentic, make it a partnership, think long-term, not short-term, get the messaging right. All of those principles still apply. The difference is we now have digital channels that enable us to reach tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people at the click of a button, and the speed and the immediacy and the engagement is better than it's ever been before. But all those common sense basic principles of how to structure an endorsement are completely applicable and still apply.
Thank you very much. I realise we're beginning to use my influence because I know people are having to now drop off and go to their next 11 o'clock meeting. So I just really wanted to say a huge thank you to you, the panel today. The three of you did a fantastic job. I really enjoyed. I've learned a lot about this whole market, and hopefully everybody who's been on has also learned today.